to be educated, but I'm so frustrated. Hello to my loneliness. I guess that ignorance is bliss. Take me back to before the new. Rewind, take it out of cue. Innocence can be a young man's game. Signed up for the hall of shame. I wish I knew.
Now you won't believe this. NFL quarterback Brett Farve, or in this case Farve, who has been under investigation by Mississippi authorities as well as the FBI in his connection with welfare fraud in Mississippi, has decided not to let the heat die down. In fact, he has decided to stir the pot. This guy, he decided that he wants to go after, of all people, Dr. Umar Johnson. Now, Brett Farve has tried to assure everyone that he had no idea that the $5 million grant, as it were, that was used to build his little pet project was being diverted from TANF, or Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. In a press release, he said, "I have been unjustly smeared in the media. I have done nothing wrong, and it is past time to set the record straight. No one ever told me, and I did not know that funds designated for welfare recipients were going to the university or me." Now, the quarterback and his law firm are accusing Dr. Johnson for repeatedly accusing him of conspiring to steal from Mississippi's poorest citizens. In a letter to Dr. Johnson, the attorneys strongly advised him to preserve and not destroy, conceal, alter, or otherwise spoliate any and all documents and information in his possession. It's ridiculous. It really is. It's like all the media outlets, all the blog sites, all the websites, everything. You choose to go after Dr. Umar Johnson? Let's look at what some of the news outlets have been saying since the information has been coming out over time.
New details now surrounding accusations that retired NFL quarterback Brett Farve used welfare funds to help build a new volleyball stadium at his alma mater, the University of Southern Mississippi, where his daughter played the sport. A former director of Mississippi's welfare agency, John Davis, has now pleaded guilty to federal and state charges that he conspired to misspend tens of millions of those welfare funds meant for the poorest families in what is the poorest state in the U.S. Text messages in a state court filing have shown Davis, Farve, and former Mississippi Governor Phil Bryant and others worked together to help secure millions in state money to build that stadium, which was a pet project of the former Super Bowl champion. Joining me now here is ABC News contributor and host of the Law and Crime Network, Brian Buckmar. Brian, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Gio.
So listen, one of those text messages from 2017 published by Mississippi Today, let's go ahead and show that to you. It shows that Brett Farve asked the head of a nonprofit handling welfare funds, quote, "If you were to pay me, is there any way that the media could find out where it came from and how much?" So given the evidence in the scandal, could Farve end up facing charges?
People might say, okay, he just didn't want people to realize he wasn't spending his own money. This is a multi-millionaire. Again, he could have just written this off in taxes paid over time to get this facility built. But he went out of his way to get money from everywhere else but his own pocket. And then you go ask somebody who you know handles funds for the state, is there any way anybody will ever find out I was connected to this? It's suspicious, Brett. That's really suspicious. And mind you, we'll later see that he had texts back and forth between he and the former governor, Phil Bryant. And Phil Bryant is telling us these are federally regulated funds. They have tight controls and restrictions. And do you think that Brett deviated from asking? Nope. He kept on asking. Now, you just been told that particular funds that you're interested in are under tight restrictions, but you keep asking? Come on, bro.
Brett Farve is considered one of the best NFL quarterbacks of all time, and the fallout over the growing welfare scandal in Mississippi has moved SiriusXM to put its weekly radio show on hold. State investigators allege that a group of some of Mississippi's most influential people spent more than $77 million that should have gone to poor families on pet projects like this volleyball arena at the university where the Hall of Famer played college football and where his daughter played volleyball.
We've seen a ton of welfare money that's intended for the poorest folks here in the state of Mississippi flowing to people who just simply did not need it.
Now, by Brett pushing for $5 million for this unnecessary volleyball court, it opened up the biggest can of worms because the auditor's office went into investigation mode, because that's an absurd amount of money for a facility, for a brick and mortar. Apparently, you can't use these funds to build buildings. So that probably alerted them right there. Now, at this time, the estimated misuse of funds used or misspent was $77 million, but it will climb later. Just keep watching.
In text messages shared in court filings, there are conversations in 2017, before the volleyball center opened, where the former quarterback is asking former Governor Phil Bryant for money to build it. And then more text messages 2 years later, this time asking the former governor to help pay for an indoor football practice facility at the same school that was never built, writing that it would give USM's football program instant credibility and USM football will become relevant again. The governor wrote back that use of these funds is tightly controlled. Any improper use could result in violation of federal law.
What are we talking about here, Brett? What are we talking about here? I didn't know where the money came from. That text message alone says you knew it was money that was federally regulated. That should have ding 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 sent off warnings. Stop asking for this money. This is not your money. This is not money we can play with. This is money that can have you locked up in federal prison. But did you think that stopped, Brett?
According to court filings, Farve didn't give up, writing the former governor again about the new volleyball center a few months later, saying, "We obviously need your help big time, and time is working against us." The former governor responded, "But we have to follow the law. I am too old for federal prison."
The DOJ is definitely closing in on others involved in this misappropriation scheme.
Farve's attorney says the football legend never knew where the money he was asking for was coming from, saying he only has good intentions with every charitable endeavor he has organized. The former governor has also not been charged or accused of any wrongdoing in this case. And to underline this, Diane, this is about money meant for the poorest people in the poorest state. Diane?
All right, Steve Osunsami, thanks for that.
Brett's attorneys want to use this cop-out where he didn't know it was going to go to TANF. He didn't know it was going to go to TANF. You're asking for a huge, absurd amount of money from the poorest state in the nation. That means that state needs every dime that they can keep to use toward the poor, if that's what they use it for. But now we're slowly finding out this was a slush fund. This was not used for the needy families in Mississippi. It was basically being used as a slush fund for pet projects for people in power. That's what we're finding out as this case evolves. Brett wasn't worried about where it came from. He was just worried about, okay, when you gonna get it to me? That's all he was concerned about. That tells me, is this the only time he's asked for monies? Is this the only time he's received money from the state for a silly little project?
Brian, what do you make of these text messages with former Governor Phil Bryant? He's denying any involvement.
Yeah, the text messages really tie Brett Farve to this whole scheme because we've already seen two individuals be convicted of crimes in regard to this, that being Nancy New as well as John Davis. And so when you see these text messages between them saying, hey, if the media finds out about this money, will they find out where it came from? Or even these reassurances that he was given, it seems like Brett Farve knew a lot more about where this money was coming from and that it wasn't meant for what he was trying to do.
Now, you mentioned Nancy New, who's charged in connection with this scandal. She is now cooperating with prosecutors as part of a plea deal. So how might prosecutors be utilizing her during this investigation?
So the text messages that we're all talking about and that you showed on the screen just a few moments ago, that really leads to a foundational argument to say, hey, there's got to be more here. What happened in the phone calls? What happened in the in-person meetings? And Nancy New, along with John Davis, who was the head of the Mississippi Department of Human Services, who just got 32 years in jail last year, those two who've already said they're going to cooperate with this investigation, they're going to be giving a lot more information than just these text messages. And maybe we will see Phil Bryant, who is the former governor, face charges, or Brett Farve and others who receive these funds face charges as well. But it's really going to come down to those communications and the information they give the DOJ.
Now, John Davis, the man in charge of Mississippi's welfare agency during the time of this scandal, he has agreed to plead guilty to fraud charges, and he could serve a maximum of 15 years in prison. So what could this mean for Brett Farve?
Yeah. It's bad because there's a strong connection between people who have already pled guilty and are going to serve serious jail time, and Brett Favre. Now, his attorney has come out and said, hey, when you look at that message and he's asking about whether or not the media is going to find out that he borrowed this money, that's a philanthropic individual saying, I don't want people to know my name is out there. I don't want them to know that I got this money. But everyone else is looking at it and saying, this looks very incriminating. What else does John Davis and Nancy New know that can't be shown in text messages? And that's going to be very detrimental to Brett Favre if it's negative.
Brian Buckmeyer, we appreciate your analysis as always. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Diane.
You heard there, they've made a series of arrests. Now, mind you, they made about 6 arrests. It was like in 2020, but apparently the feds are working their way up the chain. And if you know how the feds work, they work slowly but surely, building that case. And as you see these headlines and saying Governor Phil Bryant helped Brett secure welfare funding for this silly little volleyball stadium. Favre kept pressing. He kept pressing for the money. He secured $6 million in welfare funds. $1 million, it was like 1 point something million, was for speaking engagement, which he didn't even do. He said, hey, you gave me my money. I don't have to do all that. Come on, guys. I'm Brett. He didn't even do it. So he was forced to pay that money back. But now he's part of a civil suit apparently with the state. And he's like, I don't want to be a part of this suit. I didn't tell them to give me the money. I just asked for the money. He doesn't even want to be a part of the civil suit to reclaim the $5 million that was misappropriated to build a silly little pet project of his. In reviewing the nonprofit tax records for Brett Favre's foundation, Fair for Hope, he sent $60,000 to a booster club of a suburban Oak Grove. Basically, he was spending money from his nonprofit organization to fund things for his kids at their schools. This guy right here, he knows what he's doing. You cannot tell. Look, Brett, they're building a case against you. They really are. I would just hurry up and pay Mississippi back that $5 million and shut up and sit down somewhere instead of coming out to Dr. Umar, because this is not helping you. This really isn't helping you. And the Mississippi Free Press has basically made a timeline of all these text messages between him and other officials who are involved in the building of this facility and him requesting more monies for another facility. I'm telling you, this guy's off the chain. Brett Favre was bothering the former government, Phil Bryant, so much that in a text message, Phil Bryant said Brett needed something to do with his time outside of this. And he, in between another official, kept saying, look, I told him, look, we can't help you. Like, you're the one who made the handshake. You're the one who made the agreement. I think he needs to understand what a pledge means. It's just time to pony up the money. So they were having these discussions among themselves, but Brett kept begging, kept asking, kept begging, kept asking, can you give me money? Can you give me money? He didn't want to wait on a bond. He didn't want to go through the legislature. They were telling him the proper ways to ask for this assistance for the school. He didn't want to do any of that. He even brought up using prison labor to build facility. That's how far this guy was willing to go. That's your Brett Favre.
For former MDHS Director John Davis, who pleaded not guilty to embezzlement charges, is expected to appear in court on June 5th. Davis is one of 6 suspects accused of embezzling over $4 billion, including Executive Director of the Mississippi Community Education Center, Dr. Nancy New.
This guy is just a skis. I think it's worth mentioning the fact that he couldn't get any of his business colleagues, associates, or friends to chip in to help fund this volleyball facility. And I think that really speaks to the character or lack thereof of Brett Favre. And there might be some people who actually ask the question, what's the big deal? Well, as of 2021, more than 21% of Mississippi children lived below the poverty line. And for those who think it's just, oh, well, it's only harming black people, I got news for you, honey. Just in case you've never heard of it before, whites make up the largest share of those receiving food stamps and Medicaid, and Hispanics comprise the largest ethnic group to receive temporary assistance for needy families. And these systems in place have largely benefited Caucasians. They have not really benefited black populations. In fact, where there are a higher percentage of blacks, there seems to be more restrictive measures in place to prevent blacks from benefiting from these programs. So states that give out TANF, basically they have very restrictive measures for people who want to qualify to receive them. So much so that barely anybody gets any. So all of this money just sits there, and it's apparently used in some states, unfortunately, as slush funds for other projects instead of going to the needy families that need them, because you're afraid, oh my gosh, blacks might actually benefit. Basically, the many poor whites in the state are collateral damage. Thanks to this huge scandal, which the state auditor says is the largest public fraud case in the history of the state of Mississippi, where folks who were making the spending decisions were acting as if there were no consequences, as if there were no real rules around this money. They've actually increased the amounts that recipients of TANF receive. It's the first increase in more than 20 years. So at least one good thing has come out of this situation. Even though it's a very small increase, it's still an increase for Mississippi. And hopefully Brett Farve will have the common sense that God gave a Nat to pay back the $5 million that was misused to build that silly little volleyball stadium. That's the hope. But I think for now, Brett Farve needs to sit down somewhere and leave other people alone. Tell me your thoughts below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.